I suppose what struck me most about them was the incredible vivid colour. I mean, it seems like a rather banal thing to say, but if you think about the 50s, most books were fairly grey, and those books that weren't were printed on a kind of rather sort of browny paper, and maybe were just 2 or 3 colours, and there was something about these tank engine books that they were incredibly vivid, incredibly bright, and almost kind of glowing. Now, I mean, there's several moments in the Thomas the Tank Engine books that I can remember and I've carried with me for all my life. And I suppose one of the key ones is the moment when Henry gets bricked up in the very first of the Thomas Tank Engine books, the 3 railway engines. Now, this has just been handed to me, and I've just seen this for the first time for something like what must be 45 years. And I went, this is incredible, because I've held the picture in my head, I've held the picture there, and then suddenly I'm seeing it, and it's an extraordinary thing in which the two things are meeting. That again and again the books are returning to the idea of order and who's in charge. And obviously we know the Fat Controller, that he's the big chief. And then we have the engines, and there's a hierarchy between the engines as to who's entitled to pull the express trains, and little Thomas the Tank, who thinks that he's a bit better than that. And then below that, below the level of the engines, you've got the carriages. Audrey's fed into them, really, the way in which children relate to adults. That's actually what you're talking about. You're talking about children in families and children in schools, and the hierarchical world that children belong to, and younger children and older children. And Audrey very cleverly has, in a sense, taken those ideas about hierarchy and order and put them on to objects that we used to see around us the whole time. I just picked up, just starting from the book principle, Thomas' noisy book, and I've had wonderful fun with this because we can hear the train and the coaches and the whistles and even a helicopter. And I don't know how he got in there, but that's the cops. And then my favourite.
Really useful engine. Really useful engine.
But of course, you've got a whole apparatus now that supports Thomas the Tank Engine. You've got the videos, you've got the TV programmes, you've got the posters, you've got the models. And that, in fact, of course, is like a great whole world that you can now inhabit.
Joel says, as a small kid, and still today, I love the show Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. Do you know who the name of the person who first did the voice for Thomas the Tank Engine? Ringo Starr of the Beatles. Oh yes, Ringo Starr. I used to be in the Beatles. I think I had some very important messages. I think it has some very important messages behind most of the episodes, and the model work in the classic series is just mind-boggling to me, says Joel. And I wanted to ask you if you liked the show growing up as well. Joel, I'm 72. That show didn't start appearing until I was about 50. So I wasn't still growing up then, Joel. But I read the books when I was a boy, because the very first of the Thomas the Tank Engine books came out, I think, in 1949. You can check on Wiki for that, see whether I've remembered that properly. They're written by the Reverend Audrey. What was his first name? James? William? Anyone remember? Anyway, his last name's Audrey. And do you know, I met him. He was 95, and I met him at a book fair. Okay, so I met Mr. Reverend Audrey. He was a vicar, he was a church minister, and I met him. And when I was a kiddie, I loved it. And you know, I can still remember that picture when the engine is bricked up in the tunnel, and you can just see the engine peeping out, wanting to come out. And I thought that was so scary when I was about 5 or 6. Pictures from books when you're very young, they last all your life. And I can still see it. It wasn't Thomas who was bricked up. Anyone remember the name of the engine who was... No? Was it Henry? Maybe somebody watching will remember. Maybe you're shouting it out and I can't hear. Or maybe it'll come up on Super Chat. Yes, if you know the name of the engine who was bricked up in the tunnel, right, in Thomas the Tank Engine, you send it to me on Super Chat, and I'll tell it in a bit later.